There's an old adage that the seeds of the next crisis are sown in the resolution of the current. And I think what you're finding is the exponential small e rise of that cohort of challenger banks, and I distinguish those because they're very high tech, very digital, potentially data based, and very generational based, are quite different to some of the smaller incumbent challengers who are more traditional.
Yeah.
The challenge I think these guys are going to have is they've got fantastic technology, they've got a fantastic proposition, but they're starting with limited brand resonance. They're starting with few customers, and whilst they're building lots of customers and taking deposits, banking is a really simple business. You take deposits this side, you lend it this side, and as long as these people pay you back, then you make some money. Conceptually, what they do is a marketplace, which is in effect, it's a virtual banking shop. And part of their business is to sell third-party product. So you can go into Monzo and you can buy a product from somebody else, and Monzo will get a commission for that product. That conceptually is proven in theory, but not so much yet in practice. So I think the challenge will be, if you take the incumbent big four, you take the traditional challenges, you take the high-tech challenges, my sense is there'll be consolidation amongst that group over the course of the next few years. I think there's an inevitability to that. So I know Anne from Starling quite well, so she's from Swansea, I don't know if you know Anne,
yes,
but she's a fascinating character. And what I think they've tapped into, they've tapped into the generational psyche that says that it's about modernity, it's about convenience, but absolutely it's about better technology. So if you look at the speed to market and what you can do with those guys, you can actually get a far better digital tech proposition than maybe you can with some of the others. So I think the brand and the modernity resonates with a population, but I think what they are starting to prove is it's not just one generation. But I think their big challenge will be, I've got 3 daughters who've all got Monzo accounts, but they use it as their second banking account, not their primary banking account. So I think that's the big move that they need to make, which says, how can I be your primary bank rather than your secondary? I think it's about the definition of the financial services sector. Because if you're just UK retail, then clearly you don't have an issue that you do if you're offshore investment banking, and you need to get a contingency plan in place. I think inevitably there's a threat because businesses want stability and they want certainty. So the sort of sword of Damocles has been hanging over for a long time and continues to hang over, I think almost forces people to become contingent. And I think the time it's taken, you can see why people are making the decisions the bigger firms are making. I think if I go back probably 15 years when I was with Principality and then at some stage chairing the CBI, I spent a lot of time with the Welsh Assembly government looking at what you could do in the financial services sector. I think if I'm challenging in terms of my response, there's always more to do. I think I'm not as close as I was to the incumbent fintech sector, but I'm close to some of it. And I think it's just, again, it's almost like the reverse of the Monzo conversation. It's about brand, and I think the brand of Wales and where do you want to be if you're high tech. Does that resonate with startups outside of grant support and reasons to come to Wales that are slightly different to the financial support that you might get? I think it is a hotbed of certain parts of financial services, and I think it could be hotter. So I think with the right support strategy from Welsh Assembly Government, I see no reason why you can't build upon what you've got. I think it's all of those, but I think it's also about a generational lifestyle choice, and I'll touch upon that when I talk at the business club later. I think there's a social mood around what people look for in business and what they look for in their personal lives, and a large part of that now is increasingly around purpose, and it's increasingly around the quality of life that you want to lead. So I think there's an inherent attraction of being able to work somewhere like Wales versus central London. And I think what you're starting to see is quite a social shift in the way that people want to fulfill their life in full. Well, it's hard to argue why it would be a bad thing individually. My youngest daughter's just gone to work in Stockholm, And we were out there settling here in a few weeks ago. And the reason I think that's a good move for here is it's culturally very different, because you're back to the work-life balance. And you're back to the sort of social care that employers have, their duty of care. And it felt genuinely very, very different. So I think trying to get to a 4-day week is going to be, poison chalice in its way. But inherently, again, I think, this is a nation where, if I look back on my own career, and I look at the cost of my career, and I look at the hours that I've put in, you're probably doing, a 7-day week. Yeah. 5 of those days you're probably putting in 12, 15-hour shifts. I've done a lot of that. And then at weekends, there's also stuff to do. And emotionally, it's always with you. So I think trying to shift the work-life balance socially would be a huge incentive for the country, but I think it'll be very difficult to fulfill. Again, I'll touch upon it later. If you look at the speed of technology and the speed to market, even the last decade, the pace has grown enormously, and the next decade it will replicate even faster. And going back to the Starling Monzos, that's why these guys can have an edge, because if you're starting with new technology versus trying to replace or re-engineer legacy systems, it's hugely difficult doing this one. It's actually relatively straightforward to do this one. But the pace is exponential. I think that the real contradiction and the conundrum is the market manages businesses for cash, and leaders need to manage businesses for the long term. So if you're trying to make constant short-term decisions to hit next quarter's numbers or next half number, that's really challenging when you look at the investment cycle, that you need to take a significant paradigm shift in what it is you've got. So I think, having run 2 businesses, the conundrum now is bigger than it's ever been. And I think what you will see over the next decade is a morphing of sectorial products. So if you look at financial services, I think financial services will be predominated by retailers and telecoms companies rather than banks, because the point of purchase is either through a retailer or through telecoms. And the underpinning of that is all about data. And of course, there's a data jeopardy about how banks might use your data. But I think it's a totally different world than it's ever been, and increasingly so. I always use a misquote attributed in part to Erin Bevan and in part to Adam Smith. And that quote is: the greatest poverty we face is the poverty of our own imagination. And I would never have believed in 77, when I joined the bank, the Sex Pistols, never mind the bollocks, was number 1. And I think if I'd said to my mother 42 years later, this is where I'm going to be, she might have referred me back to the Sex Pistols quote. So the greatest poverty is the poverty of our own imagination. And I think that I've used that personally, and I've used it commercially.